The prairie fire reached Bellwether at noon, moving faster than any horse could run. Between the flames and the town lay the marsh everyone had called useless. Half of that marsh still glistened green beneath a sky black with smoke. The other half was dry because respectable men had drained it in secret. Silas Reed stood beside the final water gate with fire sweeping toward him. Behind him, nearly 300 people waited to learn whether mud could burn. 6 months earlier, those same people had demanded that Silas destroy the marsh himself. Bellwether, Kansas, had survived blizzards, grasshoppers, failed banks, and 2 murderous winters. What the town could not forgive was land that earned no visible money. Silas owned 40 acres south of town, where Willow Creek bent around low ground. 30 acres carried wheat, a small orchard, 2 horses, and 7 stubborn milk cows. The remaining 10 acres held reeds, frogs, black mud, and ankle-deep water. His neighbors saw wasted pasture whenever they looked across those shining pools. Silas saw water staying where the land had patiently taught it to stay. He was 41, broad-shouldered, quiet, and inconveniently slow to accept popular wisdom. His younger sister, Nell, kept his farmhouse and taught at Bellwether's one-room school. She understood his silences, though even she sometimes questioned the soggy acres. Their father had dug 3 shallow channels through the marsh before Silas was born. Spring floods filled them, while clay ridges released that water through the summer. Silas had maintained those ridges after everyone else began cutting straight drainage ditches. He cleared fallen stalks, repaired muskrat holes, and measured water against marked willow stakes. The work looked foolish because its success resembled nothing happening at all. That March, cattleman Elias Boone brought a proposal before the Bellwether Improvement Committee. Drought had thinned every public grazing patch and doubled the price of winter hay. Boone wanted one long ditch carrying marsh water into the sandy creek below town. Once drained, he promised, Silas's ground could support 20 cattle by autumn. Boone offered to lease the pasture and share his profits with the town. The committee heard profit, progress, and relief from taxes in a single sentence. They also heard Boone describe the marsh as a mosquito nursery and fever pit. Silas listened from the back wall until Chairman Amos Pike called his name. "That water feeds my orchard and keeps the southern soil alive," Silas said. Boone smiled politely. "Water belongs in a well, Reed, not under a duck." Laughter rolled through the meeting room, including men who had borrowed Silas's tools. Silas waited until the noise faded, then placed a brick of black soil down. He had cut it that morning from beneath the marsh's thickest sedges. Water beaded between his fingers when he pressed the brick before the committee. "That ground holds last month's rain," he said. "Your pasture holds yesterday's dust." Boone answered that cattle ate grass, not demonstrations, and the room laughed again. The committee could not legally seize Silas's land, but it controlled his water assessment. They tripled that yearly fee unless he agreed to join the drainage district. Silas had 30 days to surrender the marsh or find $90. $90 equaled his seed money and most of Nell's school wages combined. Walking home, Nell asked whether 10 wet acres were worth losing 30 dry ones. Silas stopped beside a channel where tiny fish flashed through last year's reeds. "I don't know," he admitted, "but draining it means we never learn." His answer troubled Nell because uncertainty was honest, and honest men could still fail. Silas sold 2 cows, delayed planting oats, and paid the assessment without ceremony. Boone watched the animals leave and called them the first casualties of stubbornness. By April, rain clouds gathered twice above Bellwether and delivered nothing but thunder. Prairie grass emerged thin, then curled brown before reaching a man's boot top. Silas noticed something different along the marsh's northern edge after every cold morning. Dew collected heavily on reeds and ran down their stems into shaded mud. The narrow channels spread that moisture farther than the open pools ever could. He widened 2 bends and used willow screens to slow floating leaves. His first screen clogged within 3 days and backed water against the orchard roots. 2 apple trees yellowed, giving Boone a fresh reason to visit the fence. "Your swamp is drowning the useful part now," Boone observed with genuine satisfaction. Silas removed the screen, but the released water carved a channel through his beans. He had protected the marsh carelessly and paid for that mistake with food. Nell found him after sunset, resetting stones while mosquitoes covered his neck. "Father understood this ground," Silas said. "I only remember watching him understand it." Nell brought their father's weather book from a trunk beneath her winter blankets. Its pages held rainfall marks, rough maps, and notes about channel depth. One sentence appeared beside a sketch of the northern ridge in faded pencil. "Let water travel slowly, because fast water carries the land away." Silas replaced his tight screens with spaced stones woven loosely between willow branches. Leaves caught against the branches, while water continued whispering beneath them. He cut shallow overflow grooves so no single channel could drown the orchard again. The yellow trees recovered, and the surviving beans stopped washing from their rows. It was a small success, visible mostly to two tired people at supper. Then a locomotive threw sparks into dry weeds beside the western freight siding. Men beat the flames with wet sacks before they crossed 100 yards. One tongue of fire escaped downhill into Silas's unplowed southern field. It consumed dry grass, reached the marsh sedges, and collapsed into white steam. The green stalks blackened at their tips, but the mud refused ignition. Silas knelt afterward and pushed his hand beneath the scorched surface. Cool water waited less than 2 inches under ash that had stopped smoking. Station Master Harold Finch witnessed everything and repeated it inside Boone's mercantile store. Some customers grew quiet, though Boone dismissed the fire as a handful of sparks. "A washtub can stop that kind of blaze," he told them. "We need pasture." Silas carried a scorched reed to the next committee meeting anyway. He explained how saturated soil absorbed heat, and green growth denied fire its fuel. Amos Pike examined the reed, but worried more about shrinking town receipts. Boone offered a compromise that sounded generous until Silas studied the map. He would leave 3 marsh acres and drain 7 for grazing by midsummer. The proposed ditch cut directly through the clay ridge holding the deepest water. 3 acres would become 3 dry acres within weeks, Silas told them. Boone's patience cracked. "Then your mud matters more than the neighbors feeding children." Silas looked toward families whose haylofts stood emptier than his own. Their hardship was real, which made refusing them harder than refusing Boone. He offered free cutting rights on his wheat stubble after harvest instead. Several small farmers accepted, but Boone called the offer scraps from a miser. The committee postponed its decision, leaving resentment to grow faster than grass. May arrived with hot south winds and not one soaking rain. Wells dropped, windmills squealed, and women saved laundry water for kitchen gardens. Boone moved 60 cattle onto rented ground east of town before forage vanished there. From his saddle, the marsh resembled a green banquet fenced behind Silas's refusal. One evening, 6 Boone cattle broke through a weak corner near the creek. They plunged among the reeds, crushing nests and tearing Silas's willow screens apart. A young steer sank belly deep where the central channel crossed black mud. Silas looped a rope around its shoulders while Boone shouted from firm ground. Both horses strained until the steer rolled free, trembling beneath a coat of muck. Boone thanked Silas, then pointed at the hole as proof of wasted danger. Silas pointed toward the broken fence, but accusation could not repair trampled channels. The cattle had breached a ridge and released precious water toward the lower creek. Silas worked through darkness, carrying clay and feed sacks from the northern bank. Nell held a lantern while each new layer dissolved around his boots. Near midnight, Harold Finch arrived with 3 railroad ties and a shovel. He had remembered the small fire and preferred evidence over committee speeches. Together they braced the breach, packed clay behind timber, and slowed the leak. They saved most of the upper pool, but the southern basin lost half its depth. The next morning exposed pale mud Silas had not seen since childhood. He marked the waterline and realized one broken ridge could ruin everything quickly. His father's system had a weakness because every old system eventually revealed one. Silas built a wooden gate where the upper channel entered the southern basin. The gate could reserve water above or release it across the lower marsh. He added a second lever, reachable from firm ground beside the orchard road. Nell tested it while Silas watched water spread through 6 branching grooves. "It looks like a hand opening," she said as the channels filled. That wooden hand would later hold the only water between Bellwether and destruction. June burned moisture from fence posts until nails loosened inside shrinking wood. Farmers harvested half-grown wheat early, fearing another week would turn grain to powder. Silas's crop was poor, though rows nearest the marsh carried heavier heads. The difference extended exactly as far as his shallow overflow grooves. Amos Pike visited alone and pushed his cane into moist soil beside those rows. "Could every farm do this?" Amos asked, without mentioning his earlier vote. Silas said low ground could store water, but no design suited every farm. He offered to show the committee his gates, channels, ridges, and mistakes. Amos promised another meeting, then departed before Boone could see him listening. No meeting came because the town's hay shortage became an emergency first. Boone's eastern pasture failed, and his cattle began stripping bark from young cottonwoods. He sold 12 animals cheaply, yet still lacked feed for the remaining herd. Pride had sharpened his argument. but fear now gave it dangerous weight. At Sunday service, Boone asked every landowner to sacrifice unused ground for Bellwether. Heads turned toward Silas before the preacher had even closed his Bible. Silas repeated his offer of wheat stubble and added free water for household barrels. Boone asked whether frogs would receive water before cattle, and several people murmured agreement. Nell rose from the organ bench with anger bright across her face. Silas stopped her because winning an insult rarely changed a frightened person's mind. Outside, he filled 3 family barrels, while Boone rode away without requesting one. 2 nights later, Silas awoke to a sound no dry summer should contain. Water was rushing beyond his bedroom window, fast enough to rattle loose stones. He ran barefoot toward the marsh and found lantern light moving near the creek. 3 men had cut through the southern ridge and vanished when Silas shouted. Their ditch ran straight toward the sandy channel on Boone's leased property. Water poured through a gap wider than a wagon, carrying mud and reeds. Silas dropped into the current and tried placing boards against the opening. Each board twisted from his hands and disappeared into the darkness downstream. Nell rang the farm bell until Harold and nearby families arrived with lanterns. Some had criticized Silas on Sunday, but none would watch a neighbor drown alone. They drove fence posts across the ditch and stacked grain sacks behind them. Every available sack leaked because dry cloth could not seal moving water. Silas ordered them filled with clay instead of the loose earth nearby. The clay swelled between the posts and finally weakened the escaping current. Dawn revealed a wounded marsh divided by a raw, glistening trench. Nearly 4 acres had emptied, leaving fish trapped in shrinking silver puddles. Children carried those fish toward deeper water, while adults avoided Silas's eyes. One dropped shovel bore Boone's ranch mark burned clearly into its handle. Silas took the shovel to Sheriff Wade Mercer before breakfast. Wade admitted the mark proved ownership, not who carried it that night. Boone claimed the shovel had disappeared from his wagon several days earlier. His voice remained steady, but fresh clay covered one boot above the ankle. Silas noticed it, and Boone noticed Silas noticing, yet neither man spoke. Without witnesses, Wade could file damage papers and do little else. Repairing the ridge would require timber, clay, labor, and water already gone. Nell suggested abandoning the drained acres and guarding what remained through harvest. Silas nearly agreed because exhaustion can sound remarkably similar to good judgment. Then he watched a dry reed crumble where green sedge had stood yesterday. The drained ground was becoming the very fuel his marsh had prevented. If fire came from the southwest, that new ditch would guide it inward. Silas showed Nell how the scar pointed directly toward Bellwether's first houses. Together they decided the broken half mattered even more than the healthy half. Harold organized railroad workers after their shift, while Amos donated unused bridge planks. Several families brought wagons of clay, quietly repaying water received during June. They built a low barrier across the illegal ditch instead of filling everything. Silas needed that trench temporarily to return water through the damaged basin. He connected it to his upper reserve using 2 narrow cross channels. When Nell raised the gate, water advanced across cracked mud finger by finger. The first release vanished underground before reaching even half the dead reeds. 4 dry acres drank faster than Silas's reserve could safely provide. Emptying the upper pool would sacrifice the orchard and their household supply. Silas closed the gate, leaving the damaged basin darkened but far from restored. Boone watched from horseback as workers packed their tools beneath a copper sunset. "Your friends worked all day to make expensive mud," he called across the fence. Harold answered by asking where Boone had lost his marked shovel. Boone turned his horse so sharply that dust covered his unfinished reply. Silas knew suspicion could isolate Boone, but only proof would protect the marsh. He also knew water, not justice, was the problem with a deadline. He began releasing a little reserve every evening after the day's worst heat. Cooler darkness reduced evaporation, allowing each shallow flow to travel farther. He laid cut reeds across bare mud to shade moisture from sunrise. Nell and her pupils carried armfuls after lessons, turning work into a contest. Within 2 weeks, green shoots appeared beside channels everyone had pronounced dead. The recovery looked fragile, but roots were knitting loose mud beneath the surface. Silas pulled one shoot and found wet soil clinging 6 inches below. His slow releases had stored water where one great flood had disappeared. Even Amos smiled when Silas showed him the damp root mass. Boone did not smile because the town's anger was beginning to choose another target. In late July, smoke appeared along the western horizon on 3 separate afternoons. Each fire remained distant, but every sunset turned red before touching the land. Prairie chickens abandoned open nests, and coyotes moved east during full daylight. Silas found ash floating inside a water barrel after a cloudless night. He carried it to town, where men blamed locomotives and distant homesteaders. Sheriff Wade ordered every household to clear grass around roofs and outbuildings. Boone supported that order, though he opposed Silas's request for a common firebreak. Plowing one would interrupt grazing across the South Commons and weaken exhausted horses. "We prepare for dangers we can see," Boone argued. "That smoke is counties away." Silas spread his father's map beside a new sketch of the drained trench. Southwest wind would funnel fire through that scar and around the wet basin. A narrow plowed strip could connect the marsh edge to the sandy freight yard. Together, wet ground and bare earth might form a shield before town. Amos approved the idea, but the committee divided evenly until Boone cast opposition. Silas left the meeting carrying both maps beneath an evening sky without birds. Nell asked whether they should plow the strip themselves despite the committee. The route crossed public grazing ground, and unauthorized plowing could cost their farm. Silas chose to prepare equipment without crossing that legal line yet. He sharpened 2 plowshares and soaked leather harness inside a covered trough. Harold positioned empty water barrels along the freight yard beside a hand pump. Nell taught older pupils to lead younger children toward the creek if bells rang. Sheriff Wade assigned riders to watch the western ridge each afternoon. Bellwether prepared quietly while pretending that preparation proved no danger existed. August began with 4 days of wind that never stopped after sundown. Dust entered locked cupboards and coated water surfaces beneath fitted wooden lids. The healthy marsh shrank, exposing damp margins where frogs crowded toward deeper channels. The restored section remained green only within several feet of Silas's grooves. Between those green fingers lay gray reeds dry enough to snap without bending. Silas had enough reserve for one final broad release, perhaps 2 narrow ones. Releasing early risked losing everything to heat before any fire arrived. Waiting too long meant flames could reach the channels before water did. He marked wind direction each hour and slept beside the gate under a canvas sheet. On the 5th morning, the western lookout came down the ridge at a gallop. A lightning fire had crossed 2 creeks overnight and consumed an abandoned ranch. The main front stood 12 miles west, driven northwest by a hard south wind. That course would carry it past Bellwether if the wind remained steady. Church bells summoned families while men loaded wagons with blankets, shovels, and water. Boone urged calm, warning that panic could destroy the town before fire did. Silas agreed about panic, then asked again for permission to plow. This time, Amos overruled the tie and ordered the southern commons opened. Boone protested until Wade placed a shovel against his chest and requested usefulness. Teams began cutting a dark line from the freight yard toward Silas's marsh. The ground resisted like fired clay, throwing sparks beneath each iron plowshare. Horses staggered after every furrow, their mouths white beneath leather bits. Women followed with hoes, breaking unturned clumps and dragging grass away. Older children carried pump water, while Nell counted every pupil twice. By noon, the fire's smoke towered high, but still traveled northward. Bellwether's people began believing their desperate labor might become unnecessary after all. Then the hot south wind died so suddenly that every windmill stopped together. Silence crossed the prairie, broken only by distant thunder without any clouds. Silas knew that sound was fire-consuming dry cottonwoods along the western creek. A cold gust struck his face from the northwest and reversed the weather vane. The smoke column bent east, flattening toward Bellwether like a falling black tree. Within minutes, the entire fire changed direction and raced straight toward town. The lookout estimated less than 1 hour before flames reached the southern farms. Boone stared at the drained trench, finally seeing the road Silas had described. "Tell us where to stand," Boone said, too frightened to protect his pride. Silas pointed half the workers toward the unfinished firebreak beside the freight yard. He sent others to soak roofs, close shutters, and move wagons north. Nell led every child and elderly resident toward bare ground beside the creek. Silas kept Harold, Boone, and 2 strong teams for the marsh itself. They opened the upper gate and watched reserve water surge into branching channels. The healthy basin filled first, turning shallow pools into one continuous shining sheet. Water reached the repaired cross channels, then slowed against months of settled silt. Silas jumped into knee-deep mud and cleared the first blockage with a hoe. A brown wave entered the damaged half, but divided around a mound of debris. Wind-packed tumbleweeds, broken reeds, and fence wire inside the illegal drainage cut. That tangled dam prevented water from reaching the driest route toward town. Harold hooked the wire with a chain while Boone backed the stronger horse. The chain tightened, snapped, and whipped past Harold's head into black water. Across the western fields, jackrabbits appeared first, racing blindly through wagon tracks. Deer followed them, then cattle with smoke rolling above their lowered horns. The fire remained hidden by smoke, yet its roar shook water inside barrels. Boone dismounted and entered the mud before Silas could ask him again. Together they cut fence wire, while Harold dug beneath the packed tumbleweeds. The debris shifted, trapping Boone's leg between a post and buried wagon rim. He shouted once as water climbed around his chest and smoke erased the sun. Silas could open the final gate or remain and free the man who drained everything. He handed Harold the hoe, then plunged both arms beneath the muddy water. The wagon rim would not move until Boone stopped pulling against its angle. "Push down when I lift," Silas ordered, as burning grass began landing nearby. They moved together, and Boone's boot slipped free while the leather remained trapped. Harold dragged Boone toward firm ground as Silas ran barefoot to the final lever. The wooden handle had swollen inside its guides after weeks beside standing water. Silas leaned against it, but the gate rose less than 1 inch. That thin opening produced a trickle where the damaged basin needed a flood. Boone limped back, carrying the same marked shovel found after the secret drainage. "I cut your ridge," he said. "Tell me where to strike." Silas pointed below the hinge, saving judgment for anyone who survived the afternoon. Boone drove the shovel under the gate while Silas pulled the lever again. The swollen guide split, and the wooden gate burst upward beneath their hands. Reserved water rushed south with enough force to flatten reeds before it. The surge struck the debris mound and lifted tumbleweeds from their muddy roots. Harold caught the loose wire, allowing water to carry the lighter branches away. 6 channels filled across the drained ground, like Nell's opening wooden hand. Moisture spread beneath the reed covering Silas had laid down weeks earlier. Bare gray stalks darkened from below, though their upper halves remained dangerously dry. Silas shouted for everyone to retreat behind the central clay ridge immediately. They reached it as the first flame emerged through smoke across the western field. Fire rolled shoulder-high through grass, then climbed into a wall above nearby cottonwoods. Wind tore burning pieces ahead, scattering them across the marsh like red birds. Embers landed among green sedges and vanished with sharp hisses of steam. The main flame struck saturated ground, lowered suddenly, and split around deeper pools. For one breath, the marsh appeared capable of stopping the entire prairie. Then fire found the secretly drained trench exactly as Silas had feared. Dry grass inside it ignited, creating a narrow burning path behind the wet line. Flames raced toward Bellwether between banks that sheltered them from spreading water. Silas grabbed a shovel and followed, with Boone and Harold close behind. Smoke inside the trench turned daylight brown and made every breath taste metallic. They threw wet clay onto burning clumps, but wind uncovered each smothered edge. Ahead, the trench met the unfinished fire break less than 200 yards from homes. If flames crossed there, wooden sheds would carry them from roof to roof. Nell saw the advancing thread from the creek and rang the evacuation bell again. Townspeople abandoned pumps and formed 2 lines beside the last unplowed gap. One line passed water buckets while the other dragged grass from the fire break. Amos Pike drove Silas's second plow himself after its exhausted team collapsed. Men replaced the horses and pulled with ropes, opening one final strip of earth. Silas reached the junction and found water following behind the trench fire. The opened gate had finally filled the illegal cut from its upper end. Fire moved above while muddy water advanced beneath, both racing toward the town. Silas ordered workers to breach the trench wall beside the new fire break. Boone struck first, driving his marked shovel into the bank he once destroyed. Dozens joined him until the wall collapsed and released water across bare soil. A shallow sheet spread over the final gap as burning reeds arrived. Flames crossed several feet of wet clay, weakened and curled against the wind. Bucket water struck their edges while shovels buried every surviving red tongue. Behind them, the greater fire continued roaring around both ends of the marsh. Its northern branch reached grazed ground, found little fuel, and turned toward the creek. Its southern branch swept past Bellwether across open prairie and empty Boone pasture. Between those branches, the marsh held a trembling island of people and animals. Steam covered them until faces, buildings, and even the sun disappeared completely. The freight shed caught from one flying ember despite soaked blankets on its roof. Harold led 6 workers onto the platform and tore burning boards away. Nell kept the bucket line moving, while sparks landed in her loose hair. Silas slapped them out, then returned to the trench where steam concealed hot ground. His bare foot broke through a crust and sank into burning peat below. Boone pulled him free before the hidden fire reached his ankle. They flooded that pocket with 3 final buckets and watched bubbles turn black. After another hour, The wind weakened and the southern roar moved farther east. Bellwether's bells stopped ringing because nobody had strength left to pull them. People stood in dripping clothes, listening for flames hidden beneath the silence. Only frogs answered from the deepest pool, startling everyone into exhausted laughter. The town lost one freight shed, 4 empty barns, and miles of fencing. Every occupied house remained standing, including the school nearest the southern commons. Beyond the wet line, black prairie stretched toward the horizon in every direction. Silas's marsh remained green at its center, scarred but unmistakably alive. Dr. May wrapped Silas's foot while Boone waited outside holding the marked shovel. When Silas emerged, Boone placed the shovel against the farmhouse wall. "Wade can have my confession tomorrow," Boone said. "Tonight, you have my hands." Silas gave him a lantern and pointed toward smoking roots along the ridge. They searched until dawn, finding hidden embers wherever the marsh had dried deeply. Boone confessed publicly and paid for timber, seed, and every damaged water gate. Sheriff Wade still fined him, though Silas declined to demand his imprisonment. Mercy did not erase the ditch, but punishment alone could not refill it. That autumn, Bellwether abolished the drainage assessment by a vote without opposition. The town bought adjoining low ground and asked Silas to guide its restoration. He refused the title of expert and brought his father's weather book instead. Boone spent winter hauling clay, speaking little and following every marked channel carefully. Spring rain returned, filling pools where dry pasture had nearly invited disaster. Children planted willows along the repaired ridge and named no tree for any man. Years later, travelers still saw green water dividing Bellwether from a blackened prairie. The useless marsh had earned nothing that summer except the survival of an entire town. Would you have protected Silas's marsh when every neighbor demanded profitable land? Share your answer and subscribe to Wild West Lifestyle for more frontier survival stories.